All right, good morning. My name is Wayne Robin. I'm from Johnson & Wales University. And I'm going to start the discussion off with a little background of how we got to using both the Navisite and Zerto platform. Our previous backup environment was more of a remote environment that we replicated backups to, and we had equipment available on demand in the case of a disaster. But that meant when that happened, getting the equipment, building it from scratch, going back through backups and restoring each of the applications. So it was a lengthy process. It took a long time to recover. We had issues with it. Plus, it was also still an expensive service that we were engaged in. So what we did was we looked at what are our other opportunities and how could we do things a lot better. And of course, technology was improving, and how could we, just as importantly, do things at a lower cost. So we looked at different opportunities, and one opportunity that came up was in conjunction with Ocean and Navisite, was for a virtual data center environment and using Zerto as a replication tool. We also still have some Solaris applications, so we needed some solutions for that. And our DR environment today is a mixture of some colo equipment in the Navisite environment and our Zerto. So we then moved going down that path to implement the Zerto solution between our environment and using the Navisite virtual cloud, and then also replicating to the colo environment where we had our network equipment, we had storage, and we had some of our Sun Solaris servers. We got that implemented. We've done some testing, and we do some regular testing on it. We're preparing for a big test in a few weeks. But it became a solution that was much easier to manage, much easier to execute, and it's about 2/3 the cost of what we had before. So we've increased our SLA, our recovery time, recovery point dramatically, and we saved money. So obviously the financial people at the university were very happy. I was very happy from the operational standpoint. One of the things that the partnership of Ocean and Navisite provides is Ocean provides our network connectivity. We're primarily located in Providence, although we have remote campuses in Miami, Denver, and Charlotte. So that being on the Ocean network, they built in a connection directly to Navisite. So it's an extension of their network, and therefore somewhat of an extension of our network that has more than enough bandwidth for what we needed. That was another issue that we had with our previous solution, is we only had a certain amount of bandwidth for replication, and if we had issues on our side and we needed to catch up, it would take hours and hours. So we implemented this solution, and we had some pain points along the way of working things out. Some was more on the network side, where we wanted to replicate our VLAN environment that we had back, and there were some limitations in what we could do with Cloud Director, so we actually split it into 2 virtual data centers on the Navisite side. But once we overcome that, one of the biggest advantages Zerto provides us is the recovery capability and how easy it is to do that, as well as it being able to test in a sandbox. So you can recover, test, isolated environment. You don't have to worry about locking the environment down so you don't interact with production environments or anything else, since we replicate everything as their original IPs. And we've been in that environment for about 1.5 years. And we continue to do more testing, and we've been working with both Navisite and Ocean and Zerto on some of the bumps we've had. They've worked very closely as a team to correct them, and we move forward. And again, the network capability and the Zerto capability we see our recovery point objectives in some of our testing to be in the 7 to 10 second range. So, considering that over a remote network to a remote site, we feel incredibly pleased with that type of recovery point. Dave, you want to add?
So I'll talk from the ocean perspective, and I know some of the people at Navisite know who Ocean is, but I don't know if anybody else in the world knows who Ocean is. Ocean is a research and education network based in Rhode Island. We do bleed into Massachusetts. The research and education network community is really kind of interesting. It's not well understood that we're all out there doing the kind of work we do. We are a nonprofit, and we actually work on behalf of what's called the community anchor institutions, and that's the universities and the K-12s and the libraries and the hospital consortiums and the governments. And we've built a pretty extensive network. We have about 600 miles of fiber, and if those of you who have driven across Rhode Island in 45 minutes knows that that's a lot for Rhode Island and in this area. We have 24 universities on the network. We have a few major hospital consortiums, most of the government and so forth. And so when we were moving above, we sort of come from a network centricity perspective and IP and internet and all of that, and we were moving above, what do they call above the net, right? And obviously cloud was emerging. So this was about 4 years ago. We started looking at the landscape for cloud providers, and we realized that we wanted to do something a little bit different in our selection. We knew that the AWSs of the world and the Microsofts of the world were going to go off and sort of build their hyperscale and appropriate architectures for what they do. But we did think that in a lot of our constituents, they were going to need a little bit more, care and feeding, and it's a little more complex than, and we wanted to also think, or to say that we thought the network was a component, that shouldn't be ignored. And so we literally selected Navisite for a couple of reasons. One, we thought they had a good, solid native VMware infrastructure as a service, but I think I've said this at another conference, why did you select Navisite? And sometimes I say it's because they said yes. And like, why did you get married? Just because she said yes, right? So, but what they were saying yes to was critical, and it was being amenable to our requirements. And so what we wanted to do was literally carve out a piece of the Navisite service, which was the network piece, firewalls, all of that front end, because we wanted to put our context there so that we could make it look like another node on the Johnson & Wales network, right? So, and do all that with IP address schemes and firewall context and all of those kinds of things. And we wanted to literally build in using our optical infrastructure. And so we poured 10 gig in the back door and 10 gig in the front door, and we literally made it what the industry has termed, and we like the term, a virtual private cloud. So it literally looks like another data center, and a number of our members now view it like that's our other data center. Not, it's this cloud that's over here, and we don't have that really, really tight interaction. So again, they said yes to that. And so one of the things that we've learned, we've migrated a number of our members now, up into the Navisite cloud. And Wayne mentioned, well, we use Colo for this, and that sits in the Navisite cloud. Well, that also goes over our network, and they keep some stuff, native to their own environments, and they do DR over here. And what starts to emerge is that, and you're all here because this is a little more complex than you really like this kind of thing, that's just this panacea out there. There's a lot more to this than we know. We're all migrating along the path of learning this. Zerto's been a great partner with Navisite and us and Wayne mentioned, we've had some pain points. Yeah, we've had some pain points, but also we're learning this stuff. And what you find out is, as you go along, is that this particular application that sits in this VPG that runs and has this characteristic has a little bit different characteristics for RPO and RTO and so forth, and how it replicates and how it works, then the next one. And so one of the things that we're learning is how to characterize all these applications and what to expect. We've been talking about this as we've been going along. We didn't really have a baseline. You know, we migrated Brown University almost at the same time we were migrating, you know, Johnson Wales, and I was looking at their review slides, and they said, well, you know, 5 years ago, our DR testing consisted of a bus that we put people in and equipment, and we drove to New York, and so the baselines that we're creating for expectation now in DR environments and replication environments and RTOs and so forth are very different than they were before. And so one of the things that we're doing right now is, and we're not done with this, is to literally characterize the baseline. We know it's working great, it's working, you know, but we didn't really know what our expectation should be. Is it 7 seconds? Is it 15 seconds? Is it 4? And so Navisite does a fabulous job of creating an ecosystem where Zerto is a major component of the replication engine, but they also have obviously the VMware they've got the Oracle database environment. They also have a very nice sort of middleware broker layer for visibility called Proximity that we use for visibility into all of this. And so we're still moving along at that level to characterize this environment. And so it's been a great journey, for us. Navisite's been a wonderful partner for us. So I wanted to introduce Paul Ignatius, from Navisite, new to our family here.
Thank you, Dave. Kind words. When I came on board at Navisite, I asked this question on my own, having run failover solutions in the past. I asked the question, and the answer was exactly what Dave said. Zerto said yes, right? We set out on a journey where Zerto had solved some of the critical problems that was hampering the industry, had the technology right, had the people right, had the organizational posture right to work with Navisite to offer the best of the breed solutions to the market. And I will touch upon this a little bit more on detail. From a geek perspective, 2008-9 was the time hypervisor vendors had fatigue of replication failover providers. So they kind of beat all the solution vendors out of the hypervisor and said, you stay outside, we will tell you when to capture our data and go replicate that and build those solutions as you may. And a lot of guys who had large investments into hypervisor had to rethink their game. Zerto broke that barrier, and as Wayne described, 7 seconds of NSL. Where are you in Rhode Island?
In Providence.
In Providence, and we are in Andover. Having the ability to capture data, proximity to the customer, the direct connectivity, lack of latency, and having the ability to capture that data and replicate it in a very, very microseconds fashion, and being able to provide DR and failover solutions based on that is key. That's a technology piece. Now, all great technology don't make great products. Packaging it up, working with the organizations to understand this is why I said, they said yes. When you are married to someone, you're going to see the warts and everything else and have the journey. Zerto has been very professional, open, and collaborating with us in providing some of the best solutions to Dave, who provides the solutions to Wayne. In that journey, we worked together to address some of the issues that we struggled with. We understood each other on the strengths and weaknesses, complemented each other in understanding how the patches work together, how the versions mismatches work together, provided that path. Now, I want to draw this back up to Wayne and us. Wayne, when you set out on this journey, you described your past world but I'm pretty sure you didn't set out to solve all those problems in the first shot. What were the problems that you tried solving initially, and how has that changed over the time in this journey with Navisite and Zerto and Ocean?
Sure. Well, I guess the expectations were to make the recovery process much quicker than we had in the past, much more streamlined, need less resources, to fit more into our high-level recover in 24-hour targets and such for our critical applications. So that was really the basis. Again, as Dave mentioned, we didn't have a basis expectation that, if we move to this solution, it's X in time. That was a learning process as we went through it. So that was, again, out of the gate, make it simpler, don't need as much resources, easier to fail over, definitely make our critical recover within 24 hours, and do it at a less of a cost. As we got into it and we worked through things and we started doing testing, the time frames became much faster than we anticipated. So the end result was, we wanted to get to 24 hours. It's much less than that to recover all our critical applications. So I think that was the next expectation. And now, as you know, we're here and it's like, can we go a little faster?
Yes.
But that's maybe a little greedy. But I would say the first thing was making sure that we could meet our 24, which was a challenge before. And now it's much less than that. And I think it's, we're trying to make it even more refined from there.
So Dave, in that journey to provide the consummate experience for your client, what were your evaluation criteria? What were your yardsticks that you went with?
Well, one of the things was that we had everything from Brown and Johnson & Wales at an enterprise level down to St. Rosa Lima's school with literally a secretary with USB keys in the desk as her backup, right? And everything in between. So and those vertical markets all have different characteristics. You get into the hospital and the healthcare environments, and literally I just read an article last week that basically said the hospital data centers will be extinct in 5 years. Now, if you think about, and that was a healthcare IT article, right? So you think about that and their individual requirements and the HIPAA compliance and all the things that you need to do to do that, and realize that they're on that path, that we had this really wide swath of requirements. But the one thing and the big thing was to make sure that they were, so first of all, data locality is an interesting subject, because data locality changes if I'm running a 10 gig or 100 gig circuit to somewhere, right? And so we're spending a lot of time in our network creating this virtual private cloud environment where data locality is solved by like 100 gig, right? So at the wide area. And so being able to work with a company that was allowing us to do that, and somebody who thought that the ecosystem around this was probably a little bit more complex than just sort of that cookie cutter thing, and be able to put those kinds of solutions and continue to drive those solutions. Wayne mentioned this, whether we're greedy or not. I don't know if it's greedy, but we keep pushing the envelope, right? And trying to get to that next level. I do think we might have, we talked about this last year, is we might have broken records for seed times right across the wide area, because we had these like massively wide open pipes, and we could just like seed these huge systems in like no time. That was really kind of cool. But we're dealing with things like the VPN issues in data centers, and we've worked with our engineers and Navisite's engineers to implement Cisco's ACI infrastructure in the data center to flatten sort of the data center infrastructure, to take some of those limits that Wayne had mentioned about throughput through VPN tunnels and things like that off the plate, so we can ratchet up, that data, again, that data locality issue. We do think that over time, that this virtual private network environment with the engineers that you guys bring to the table and us can start to do things that are far more software-defined data center to software-defined data center technologies, VMware overlays over Cisco's ACI infrastructure, for example, which are things that we're literally working on right now, which are really then ratchet up the automation, reduce the complexity of the kind of infrastructure we support.
So coming back to you, Wayne, you touched upon a very interesting word, critical applications. So what applications are you now having Zerto protected at this point?
Sure. Well, our largest one is our emission system. So its group is 7 servers and equates to 2.2 terabytes of data. And we have a lot of our other. We replicate some of our Active Directory pieces, our Pharos printing. Some of our student applications. Our largest student application being Banner is still on the Solaris, but eventually that will be migrated to Linux and be in our VMware. So we have 22 groups. So that's probably segregated into 22 different applications with multiple servers within them that we break down and recover.
So your SLAs at this is the solution meeting your SLAs on this at this point?
Yes, and I think we were kind of moving to this environment. We weren't overcommitting to the university as far as our SLA.
Yeah.
They're, from a business continuity, they still have that 24-hour mark.
Yep.
We can obviously see it's less than that. Our big test is coming up in June to do really the full time check of our complete recovery. And at that point, we'd probably be more apt to go back to the university and say, this is really your new SLA.
Could you give a little bit more color to your journey with Zerto and Navisite and Ocean on this? How has the experience been? What were your struggles? How did the Navisite Ocean partnership and in conjunction with Zerto respond to your challenges?
Sure. So I think initially a lot of our struggles are more around the network organization and VLANs and things like that. So the Ocean engineers and some of the Navisite engineers worked with us to kind of get that up and running. I think once we had things running and we were working it, when we encountered, and we did encounter some issues, some of it were release level differences, some were things with the complexity on the Navisite side. We encountered a few, and I think when we got to a point, it was like, okay, we need to put this as a task force together to look at these things. Navisite, engaged Zerto. Zerto had their engineers on board with you in a Tiger team. We engaged into having regular weekly meetings with the full group. And actually when we would work through it, so we'd feedback, logs, different things, but it was a working group together of Ocean, Johnson & Wales, Navisite, and Zerto. And even when, at one point it was, okay, we need to upgrade the release level on your side. We want to step through it carefully. We actually had Navisite and Zerto engineers available on site to step us through it and remotely available to help through that. So, the cooperation between the 4 groups has been really outstanding. And Zerto, I felt, really stepped up to the plate. Even with some issues ending up being more on the VM side than the Zerto side, they were still right there helping us work through the situation. So, it was a pretty seamless and continues to be a pretty seamless group working between the 4 teams.
So Dave, from your end, having gone through this journey, what's your next level? Where do you want to take this?
Well, I'd mentioned the automation. One of the things about, when we talk about an ecosystem, we're obviously at ZertoCon, so we're talking a lot about Zerto. But in the ecosystem, there are more players, right? So, at one level, when we're talking about the VPN technology, and then the VPN technology into Cisco's virtual firewall? Do I choose the virtual firewall? How does the virtual firewall work versus their hardware firewalls? There are differences. How do they work? What are their capacities? How did that all play? Then you get into, well, we're using F5 load balancers, and then we're using, we get further into the environment. So by the time you're done, there's probably 10 vendors in the ecosystem. So this sort of primary consortium of Navisite and Zerto and Ocean working together had fingers off it, working with the Ciscos and VMwares and Oracles of the world that play a role. What we learned about that at the time, and we continue to strive to get better at, is that that's not just a technical interface. There's somebody who designed it, there's somebody who supports it, and so forth. So building the support ecosystem of people who understand what the heck we put together here, right, was another thing. And how do we generate the workflow for those people? And how do what kind of information goes in a trouble ticket? All of that, we need more of the information in the trouble ticket. So we've worked and improved that whole thing. And how does that get socialized? That's key. But I think longer term, what I'd love to see, sort of that panacea, is this idea of a more software-defined and automated data center to data center environment. I don't know how many people know about Cisco's application-centric interface and their data center layout, but that's an idea to take out the VPN complexities in data centers. Well, what they did was they did a really good job of a singular data center implementation, but they haven't gotten to the internetworking between data centers. And so now VMware can kind of come in and maybe provide an NSX overlay, right, to the ACI environments. And now maybe we can do vMotions across data centers and start to get to that level of automation. And all along, I think, and Paul and I have talked a lot about this, is I do think that there's a huge value in this sort of broker layer visibility. And that's like, how are things working? And if Wayne wants to run, 85 tests, well, he's probably only going to run the P1s, he'll run that often, or run the P2s less often, or run the P3s less often, and how does that get categorized? And then how does it get reported back, and results and the characteristics of those environments, and providing that sort of broker layer in between to provide the visibility back to our members is something that I think we really want to be involved in.
Very interesting. So Wayne, coming back to you, in that broker layer, the visibility that you get, today you are on a infrastructure-centric view. You mentioned your applications in this context. How big are these applications? How many VMs? How complex are these? And how critical is having that application level view in this environment for you?
Sure. So I mentioned our Talisma application is our biggest one. So that's 7 servers in one recovery group, 2.2 terabytes. That recovery is occurring in about 15 minutes. As far as the view, I mean, one of the things that my VM specialists utilize is actually the Zerto plugin into vCenter and their regular VM monitoring. So they're used to that. They're looking at that more often, and that plugin allows them to see the Zerto replication, the status of it, as well as even when we do our test, we can see the results in there, even without going into your proximity summarized view. So I think they find, just at that plugin layer now, it pulls that information right into where they're already working with their VM stuff.
You described your world changed from the 24-hour people on a bus to very fast expedient. Do you have to take your primary offline at this point to do the testing?
No, and that's, I think I mentioned at the beginning, that the nicest thing about the Zerto environment is when you fail over and do a test, it's really sandboxed. So it's self-contained, it's spinning up with the exact server names, IPs, VLANs that are established on our production side, but there's no interaction with the outside network without having to, do any network side. as opposed to when we do our full test, it includes our colo,
Yep.
then with that, we need to isolate the network and do that. But on the Zerto side, that's why we can do multiple tests, little tests here, be constantly doing different tests even when we're working
Right.
through issues,
Yep.
because it's completely sandbox. You spin it up, you have it, you can do whatever you do, you click, and it's gone. So that, like I think I mentioned in the beginning, was one of the biggest values of the Zerto environment, is that you can easily test without any interaction or impact to the production environment.
Very good.
So one of the things that's interesting about this data locality issue, what we want to continue to migrate to, is 3 years ago, if we did our sort of application or bandwidth characteristics across our network, 65% of our traffic went out the ISP world. So we have multiple ISPs that connect into our network, the Cogents and the level 3s and so forth. And so 65% of our traffic went that way, and the rest of it sort of stayed local, either went to a cloud or went between buildings or went to a purpose-built CDN. That is now flipped. So now only 30% of our traffic goes out over the public internet. The idea of data locality now becomes, where is the optimal place to do a peering point or a cloud connection to get that data locality on net for us? And so sometimes those peering points are directly with our cloud service provider and that kind of thing. But now, and Navisite has announced this idea of now, well, Microsoft might be good for these payloads, and we want to be able to manage those environments. So now you get into hybrid payloads. And so we sit there and say, well, we want to provide the same connectivity to Azure in that same environment. Then that broker layer comes into play to say, how are those payloads operating? What kind of performance am I getting now between those two environments? And we have direct connectivity to Apple CDN, to, I'm one of the highest, I'll get a kick out of this, one of our highest bandwidth applications is Netflix. For those of us who pay tuition, that's disturbing. But it's a fact, right? And so we have massive Netflix caches sitting one hop away from Wayne's dorm, right? Right? And Google caches, the Google for Education is a massive application, especially in our K-12 environment, on net, right? So we have these peering points and caching points. So that data locality is now getting very complex, right? So we have hybrid cloud environments, and now one of our big things is hybrid storage environments, because we're convinced that the same architectures for sort of production level high performance compute at the storage level is very different than the archival storage answers, right? And the price points and all of that, and we've all heard the stories about grep charges. If you put it in Glacier and then you pull a grep charge, and all of a sudden you get a $25,000 bill because you pulled a file down, right? So what are the answers to that data locality and those services, and how does that get routed and managed and served? So that's a big issue for us now.
You are very committed and passionate about
I should be
the
committed.
bandwidth and proximate to the customer. How have your clients responded to that differentiating advantage you have presented, right? The reduction of latency. How much do they care about it?
A lot.
Well, I'll give you an example. Wayne and I have been talking about application connectivity, just some of these CDNs, and in the Northeast, a lot of these peering points don't come above New York. Unfortunately, they didn't get to Boston in a lot of these environments, and so we have a regional network that Ocean runs that just lit some unlit infrastructure down to New York City, so straight into 32A of A and the Google POP at 111 8th and so forth, and then up to Albany in a big sort of super, and this is the part about technology. We skipped, so not only did we run most of our network at 10 gig, we skipped the 40 gig market and we skipped the 100 gig market. We actually are building 200 gig waves down to New York because Wayne wants peering points in New York for some of those CDN-based applications, right? And so it's very important, to our members to have this idea of data locality in a virtual private environment. The other aspect of it is that as a nonprofit, if we can keep that stuff in our virtual private environment and pure, it doesn't cost anywhere near what it would normally cost to build a circuit to get to that environment. So we can, and as a nonprofit, we don't add anything on top of it. So it becomes very, very cost effective to do that kind of data locality.
So, questions from the audience to us? We described some of the conversation points.
So, a little bit off topic, but on topic. I kind of feel like VMware solved the problem of if the server crashes, you've got backup right away because you just know where it's host. And that Zerto is really addressing more of a catastrophic failure of a facility down, a fire in a building or something else. When you look at DR, it's really a subset of business continuity, and business continuity deals with people and process. And the traditional co-locations address that issue by providing space for people to bring to. So I see one of the roadblocks that I find when trying to sell a cloud-based solution, going to Azure, going to Navisite, and I don't know if Navisite addresses that issue or not. You guys might have co-location space. Is how are you dealing with those issues? Where are you moving people to? I hear a lot of times, well, they work from home. That doesn't work in a lot of small business enterprises. It wouldn't work in mine. There are too many supervised responsibilities that people need to be at a location. There's checkpoints and things like that. So I'm just trying to come up with ways other people are doing things to help present that case in my company.
So I didn't quite capture the use case that you described. So is the issue being far away enough, or is the issue that redundancy and failover capabilities?
Or is it more from a end user standpoint of being able to have a working space for them if their area is also wiped out?
Exactly. So, and I think that in the long run, eventually those will become some of the things as data centers are no longer at your local location. But, if my building burned down, nobody's got a place to work. There's no IT, there's no anywhere. So the traditional sun guards and SharePoint, something like that, they provided, you got a 100-seat working place for people. If I put myself up in Azure, or I don't know about Navisite, if I put it somewhere else, I don't address that question. So they're like, let's just keep it where it is because they address that problem.
The physical office space problem. Right? We don't solve the physical office space problem. But
and in my community, if there's a snowstorm, school's out, right? So that's one answer. On the other side, I've got a hospital. So where does the surgeon go, right? And where do the patients go? And so each one of those is so unique to the enterprise that we serve that we have to actually leave that to the individual enterprise. So if I had, the CIO of Care New England sitting up here, they would have a very different answer than we might have, than our K-12 might have. It's individuals.
And the reliability of the service is what we are focusing on more than the physical presence issue, right? So my engineers know this from my end firsthand. Make sure that your kids can go to surgery in the hospitals we host.
All right. So that probably didn't answer your question.
No. So any other questions, comments?
All right.
All right.
Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.
Well, thank you.
I want to
Appreciate it.
thank you. Yeah.